Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and starting in verse 3, it says, "We ought always to give thanks to God for you, brothers, as is only fitting, because your faith is growing abundantly, and the love of each one of you all toward one another increases all the more, so that we ourselves boast about you among the churches of God for your perseverance and faith in the midst of all your persecutions and afflictions which you endure." This is an amazing thing. And certainly the Apostle Paul could boast about this church because in the midst of their trials and their persecutions, faith and love were increasing, he says. He says here that your faith is growing abundantly, and the love of each one of you all toward one another increases all the more. This is amazing because what we find oftentimes is that these two things decrease when sufferings arise. That is, whenever the heat is turned up, whenever difficulties arise, whenever we find ourselves in those really dark places of life, it can be the case that faith begins to wane and love begins to decrease. Our faith begins to decrease and to wane because we begin to question God. We begin to wonder, how could God allow this to happen to me? Here I am trying to be faithful to him, and yet these hardships and trials are coming upon me. And sometimes suffering can cause our faith actually to begin to dim in the midst of sufferings. And then also sometimes love begins to decrease as we begin to turn inwardly because of the trials that are coming upon us. We tend to become self-focused when we're dealing with something very hard. We begin to really clam up and begin to just focus on our own problems and our own troubles, and we don't want to even think about other people's problems that they have because we're wrestling with our own. And love can oftentimes decrease in the time of suffering. But for the church at Thessalonica, these two things were increasing. They were being persecuted for their faith. They were in immense trials and all these things, and yet their faith was increasing and their love was increasing. And that's a wonderful thing. And we have to ask ourselves, what happens to us when we suffer? When the dark clouds begin to overshadow our lives, when we get into those hard times, whether it's just simply having a bad day one day, or whether it's something tragic that enters into our lives, do these things cause our faith and our love to decrease, or our faith and love to increase? It is a great thing when we can rise above the sufferings and the trials of this life, and all the more hold fast to faith and continue in the steadfastness of faith, and also to be able to look around at the other people around us who are suffering, and to not become self-focused, but to be outward focused and looking at the needs of others and meeting their needs. The thing about it is that, this is the best way to deal with suffering. Why? Because when our faith is strong, then we are able to put our trust in the Lord, and it helps us through the trials. Blaming God, getting mad, getting despondent, and disillusioned, that causes all the more suffering, because then we lose contact with the only person who can actually help us and strengthen us through the trial. And then also love, increasing love can help us get through too, because when we're not so self-focused, when we're not just looking at our own situation, but we're actually looking out for other people and meeting the needs of other people, it gets our mind off of our own situation, and it helps us to cope with the sufferings that we are enduring when we aren't so focused on what we're going through, but focused on others. And so this is actually the best way to deal with trials, but it's not always the most frequent way that we deal with trials. And so hopefully the church at Thessalonica will inspire us. When the hard times come, when the heat is turned up, let's make it our intention to increase our faith in those moments, and to also increase our love. It will help us to get through those sufferings, of course, better but it will also lead us into a life more pleasing to God. And so these are some things we can reflect on and think about as we do our reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.